Hi, we are from Group 13. In this video, we are going to talk about occupational noise exposure and hearing conservation. But before we get started, let me introduce our group members. Do you know, worldwide 16% of the disabling hearing loss in adults is attributed to occupational noise, ranging from 7% to 21% in the various subregions. The effects of the exposure to occupational noise are larger for males than females in all subregions and higher in the developing regions. Studies show that workers employed in the construction, manufacturing, mining, agriculture, utility and transportation, industries, military personnel, and musicians have the highest risks to experience hearing loss. Exposure to workplace noise for more than 10 years increase the odds of having any hearing loss and moderate to severe hearing loss. But what is occupational noise exposure? Occupational noise is the amount of acoustic energy received by an employee's auditory system when they are working in the industry. Occupational noise or industrial noise is often a term used in occupational safety and health, as sustained exposure can cause permanent hearing damage and other health problems. The extent of damage depends primarily on the intensity of the noise and the duration of the exposure. Occupational noise is considered an occupational hazard, traditionally linked to loud industries such as shipbuilding, mining, railroad work, welding, and construction, but can be present in any workplace where hazardous noise is present. What is the OSHA standard for occupational noise exposure? The image shows the everyday sound levels and job site sound levels in decibels. There are different standards set on hazardous occupational noise by the authorities in their respective industries. Each industry is different, as workers' tasks and equipment differ, but most regulations agree that noise becomes hazardous when it exceeds 85 decibels for an 8-hour time exposure, which is the typical work shift. Exposure to more than 85 decibels required the employers to implement hearing conservation programs. This relationship between allotted noise level and exposure time is known as an exposure action value (EAV) or permissible exposure limit (PEL). The EAV or PEL can be seen as equations which manipulate the allotted exposure time according to the intensity of the industrial noise. This equation works as an inverse exponential relationship. As the industrial noise intensity increases, the allotted exposure time to still remain safe decreases. Previously, we already mentioned hearing conservation program, but do you know what is a hearing conservation program? Hearing conservation is a program designed to prevent hearing loss due to noise in a workplace. A hearing conservation program is required by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration (OSHA) whenever employee noise exposures equal or exceed an 8-hour time-weighted average sound level of 85 decibels measured on the A scale or equivalently a dose of 50%. Besides, another situation that requires hearing conservation program are as below. Next, let us take a look at the historical background of hearing conservation program. The U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration (OSHA) noise exposure regulation became effective in 1971, so OSHA has been enforcing its regulation for 51 years now. Since 1983, OSHA's regulation has included an amendment to require specific components related to hearing protection, audiometric testing, and training. This amendment has become known as the Hearing Conservation Amendments. At first, OSHA's intention in 1971 was to remove hazard or remove the worker when noise exposure reached a time-weighted average of 90 decibels. However, on 1981, OSHA promulgated the Hearing Conservation Amendments, which effectively lowered the criterion level to 85 decibels by requiring employers to implement a hearing conservation program when exposures reach 85 decibels. OSHA called this the action level. Importantly, the HCA outlined 5 components of an effective HCP and gave audiologists an important role as professional supervisors. Additionally, the HCA appeased industry because it allowed the elements of audiometric monitoring and hearing protection in lieu of potentially expensive engineering controls to prevent hearing loss in the workplace. The HCA amendment was immediately pulled back by the Reagan administration for the Office of Management and Budget to scrutinize the amended standard with respect to its impact on industry. The review process took 2 years, but finally in 1983, the final stripped-down version of the HCA was released and hearing conservation was back on track. What is the objectives of hearing conservation program? The first objective is to prevent initial occupational hearing loss. Second, to preserve and protect remaining hearing. Third, to equip workers with the knowledge and hearing protection devices necessary to safeguard themselves. Employers are required to measure noise levels, provide free annual hearing exams, hearing protection and training, and conduct evaluations of the adequacy of the hearing protectors in use, unless changes made to tools, equipment, and schedules result in worker noise exposure levels that are less than the 85 decibels. Research indicates that workplaces with appropriate and effective hearing conservation programs have higher level of worker productivity and a lower incidence of absenteeism. Next, let's move on to the elements of hearing conservation program. The CSA Standard C1007 Hearing Loss Prevention Program Management recommends that a hearing conservation program include the following elements. First, hazard identification and exposure monitoring. Second, control methods using the hierarchy of controls. Third, hearing protection device, which includes selection, use and maintenance. Fourth, audiometric testing. Fifth, hazard communication, education and training. Sixth, record keeping. And lastly, continuous monitoring and improvement. Do you know how to monitor noise exposure at the workplace? Usually, noise exposure monitoring was done with either a sound level meter (SLM) or a dosimeter. Noise dosimeter is worn by the employees as they go to their daily works. The noise dosimeter takes many noise measurements and compiles them into a final reading. A SLM also measures the noise levels, but the noise levels are recorded and the exposure are calculated by a person. These SLM or dosimeter level measurements determine if the employee's noise exposure levels are equal or greater than 85 decibels, called the action level. All employees whose noise exposure equals or exceeds the action level are required to enroll in an HCP.
How can we reduce or control this noise exposure? Here is the answer. Occupational safety and health professionals use the hierarchy of control to determine how to implement feasible and effective controls. This approach groups action by their likely effectiveness in reducing or removing the noise hazard. This hierarchy of controls arrange in the sort of the most effective to the least effective. In most cases, the preferred approach is to eliminate the source of hazardous noise. When elimination is not possible, substitution of the loud equipment for quieter equipment may be the next best alternative to protect workers from hazardous noise. If the hazardous noise cannot be controlled through elimination of the source or substitution of quieter equipment, engineering controls may be installed to reduce noise to safer levels or remove noise at the source. If it is still not possible to remove the hazard through elimination, substitution, and even engineering controls, the next step is to reduce noise exposure through the use of administrative controls. And the last option in the hierarchy of control is personal protective equipment (PPE) such as earplugs or other hearing protection devices. As I said before, elimination is the most effective way in reducing and controlling the noise exposure. But what is elimination? Elimination is a process that eradicates the noise source to prevent risk to workers and should always be considered when introducing a new work process, selecting new work equipment, and designing the layout of the workstations. Example of noise elimination will include avoiding the use of noisy processes or machinery, elimination of impacts between hard objects or surfaces, and lastly, moving the noisy operations away from other work activities. Other alternative is substitution. Substitution is a process of replacing noisy machinery or equipment with quieter alternative. Employers should always consider alternative equipment and work processes which will make the job less noisy. It is also important to keep up to date with the applicable standards and industry good practice. Performing a task differently can also protect the workers from noise exposure. For example, the use of welded instead of riveted construction and fabrication, and also the use of hydraulic processes in bending the material to produce less noise compared to hammering method. Other alternative is engineering controls. Engineering controls are planned, process or equipment that minimize the exposure to excessive noise, suppress the level of exposure or limit the area of exposure. Types of engineering control include absorption, insulation, dampers, silencer and vibration insulation. There are also two basic engineering control measures for controlling the noise level, which are engineering control at the source and engineering control at the noise transmission path. However, the most effective way is by implementation of engineering noise control at the source. If all the alternative control methods cannot be implemented, then there is another way, which is administrative control. Administrative control is defined as administrative methods or approaches that reduce exposure of workers to noise. This measure may include job rotation, distance and scheduling rosters so that as few workers as possible are exposed to noisy operations, and providing quiet areas for rest breaks for employees that are exposed to noisy work. Last but not least, the least effective way is personal protective equipment (PPE) that protects the users from any adverse effects on hearing caused by exposure to high levels of noise. It is the last option in the hierarchy of control and should be used as a last resort after all efforts to eliminate or reduce the noise level have been exhausted through technical and organizational means. It is important to make sure that the hearing protection chosen to protect the workers is suitable for individuals, working environment and compatible with other personal protective equipment being used, as example, hard hats. To choose the correct type of hearing protection, employers must use the result from their noise assessment and the information from hearing protection suppliers. Next part is audiometric test. Have you heard about audiometric test? Audiometric testing monitors an employee's hearing over time. It also provides an opportunity for employers to educate employees about their hearing and the need to protect it. Why do audiometric testing? Audiometric testing is important to the success of the hearing conservation program because it helps determine if occupational hearing loss is being prevented by the noise control measures. Because occupational hearing loss happens gradually over time, workers often fail to notice changes in their hearing ability until a relatively large change occurs. By comparing audiometric tests from past years, yearly changes can be detected and appropriate protective measures can be implemented to prevent further damage. How do audiometric tests perform? There are few tests involved in audiometry. A pure tone test measures the quietest sound that it can hear at different pitches. It involves using an audiometer. The audiologist will play a variety of sounds such as tones and speech at different intervals into one ear at a time to determine the range of hearing. The audiologist will give the instruction for each sound. Another hearing test allows the audiologist to assess the ability to distinguish speech from background noise. Next, a tuning fork may be used to determine how well you hear vibration through the ears. The audiologist will put the metal device against the bone behind the ear to determine how well the vibration passes through the bone to our inner ear. In conclusion, loud noise can create physical and psychological stress, reduce productivity, interfere with communication and concentration anytime. Exposure to high level of noise can cause permanent hearing loss. Neither surgery nor a hearing aid can help correct this type of hearing loss. Short-term exposure to loud noise can also cause a temporary change in hearing, where the ears may feel stuffed up or ringing in the ears, which we call tinnitus. These short-term problems may go away within a few minutes or hours after leaving the noise. However, Repeated exposure to loud noise can lead to permanent tinnitus and hearing loss. Therefore, under Occupational Safety and Health Act law, there are obligations where the employers need to ensure their employee safety, as it's their right and protection, as had a hearing conservation program, wearing hearing protectors, and perform audiometric tests. Violation of the Occupational Safety and Health Act standards for noise levels triggers penalties between $5,000 to $70,000 depending on the severity of the violation and the company's past history. To enforce this noise level regulation, investigators from one of Occupational Safety and Health Act's more than 200 field officers can drop in for a surprise inspection of a company's work environment at any time. Hence, the employers along with the employees need to follow the Occupational Safety and Health Act standards under the noise exposure, like head hearing conservation program, follow the hierarchy controls, and perform the audiometric test, as it is for the benefits of both workers and companies in terms of hearing, prevention, safety, and other relevant factors. The evaluation of any hearing program should be considered as the first priority in safety and management in workplace, as it may be effective in reducing overall incidence of hearing loss. However, in the absence of noise control at source, highly exposed workers remain at unnecessary risk. That's all from our group. Thank you for watching.